Hello everyone. As we continue looking at chapter 4, we have one other area to look at before we can launch into the overall framework of growth diagnostics. That last framework, that last piece of the puzzle here has to do with information externalities, imperfect information more generally. This is a very important component of current thinkings about problems of development and of underdevelopment. And we'll see this in the class in a number of instances. So we're just going to touch on one aspect of it now. So information imperfections can cause a lot of problems. And so from chapter 9, when we look at agriculture, one example is that inability of potential buyers to know the quality of agricultural products, such as produced by a given farmer or a given village area, will make it impossible for them to give a fully favorable price because of the risk that it will not be of good quality. Another area where imperfections in information become important is in finance. And we'll see a particular problem in which lenders don't know the quality of underlying potential borrowers. So they don't know whether or not they really have a good productive entrepreneurial activity. They don't know whether or not it's an honest person, if it's the kind of person who would work hard, would try to be sure to repay the loan no matter what. So that this poses some special problems in getting funds efficiently to the best users, the best uses of those funds and the best users. Here we're going to look at one example of an information externality. And this has to do with the problem of the so-called self-discovery of Hausman and Roderick. And so I think it's important to cover this now because it's a problem that can apply to economy-wide development rather than in particular, albeit extremely important sectors like agriculture and like finance. And it's therefore part of the overall building blocks of growth diagnostics. So I'll spend a moment on it now. So the idea here, the underlying concept, is that no person is born knowing their own personal comparative advantage in labor markets. I mean, for example, I was not born knowing that I had a comparative advantage in economics and in international development studies broadly. And so just by some analogy, no country, in some sense, knows its comparative advantage in international markets by some automatically revealed manner. Almost always it has to be found through some trial and error. Various entrepreneurs are out there trying different products, different services, and some work and some don't. And so it's a problem of information, finding this out. Now, common advice that's been given to developing countries for decades really is to say that, well, you have lots of unskilled labor. So clearly you should specialize in products that are intensive in their use of unskilled labor. Well, that sounds sensible enough until you realize that there are literally thousands of products that are produced efficiently with lots of unskilled labor. And so every country is not going to find its comparative advantage evenly, if at all, among these thousands of possible products. And so the idea is that if you search among these many possible products in which a country has a comparative advantage, eventually you will find very good opportunities, profitable, do well on world markets. But the issue is that once an entrepreneur figures out a particular product that's efficient to produce, a new way to produce it, a new market, likely a foreign market for their product, then this information about what's efficient fairly easily spills over to other potential entrepreneurs in that economy. There may be big barriers to ideas spreading across countries. That's quite important, and we'll get to that idea later in the course. However, and covered later in the textbook. However, here the issue is that the individual entrepreneur is going to have less incentive to spend resources trying to discover what this country, their abilities in this country with this country's resources will be in terms of what it is relatively efficient to produce and sell, even in world markets. And so, given this basic problem of under-incentive, what could industrial policy or an industrialization strategy do about the problem? In particular, the information problem of finding the true direct and indirect costs of products, so you know what to specialize in. Well, there's two things that a government could in principle do. The first is to encourage exploration in the first stage, if you want, of this problem. So that if you have too few entrepreneurs searching out, spending resources and searching out new opportunities, the government can provide incentives. And they could be support facilities of different kinds, loan availability, and some direct subsidies, lots of possibilities for supporting and special training. Then, eventually, perhaps one activity has been found to be highly effective in all of this searching. This means that there's a lot of investment that's already occurred with a lot of sunk costs in other products that may be significantly less efficient, but the firms keep producing them because, after all that capital investment and so on, it's just now a sunk cost, and so that's how they view things. This is one example that was actually brought out originally by Ricardo Hausman and Danny Roderick. That was the case of cut flowers exports for the country of Colombia. Now, some entrepreneur in Colombia figured out that, for whatever reason, the existing skills, resources of Colombia were very good for growing flowers that, after they were ready, you cut the flowers, you package them up in some way, put them on airplanes, and ship them to where the markets were, such as Washington, D.C., where they're unpacked, and then there's local distributors who take them and sell them at the Foggy Bottom metro stop and other places. And so somehow this had been discovered. It was very quickly imitated by many other entrepreneurs. So the information spilled over once it was, got to be tried out and could be observed, but didn't necessarily occur quickly. The other thing, besides encouraging exploration, that government could in principle do is to encourage movement out of those sectors where there are sunk costs, but what is fairly inefficient for the economy to be doing overall. So these are the ideas. Now, it is very difficult to prove that such a theory is general in its implications, as you can imagine, but theories have implications, and if the implications hold, that's at least not evidence against the theory, and maybe considered, depending on what you have, pretty good evidence in favor of the theory. So that the authors who developed this, Hausman and Roderick, noted that there were three building blocks of the theory. And that is the three we have here. And the first is uncertainty about what products can be produced efficiently. And so there are plenty of examples. You can find them, no doubt, yourself. But the authors had a couple of good ones that I thought are worth pointing out. One is India's widely unexpected success in information technology. I didn't expect it. I don't think anyone else did, particularly. Maybe a few of the original entrepreneurs in that area figured it out correctly. Another one, Bangladesh and Pakistan both specialize in relatively unskilled production. But it turns out that Bangladesh is very efficient, or was at the time the authors did the study at least, very efficient at producing hats. And Pakistan, very efficient in producing bed sheets. I don't know why. The authors didn't know why. Someone must know why, but this just does show, I think, that uncertainty about the products that would be produced efficiently, just with these couple of examples. They're just a couple of case examples, and you can put together more, but they get across the idea that, yeah, this is almost undoubtedly the case. The second is need for local adaptation of foreign technology. So you can't just take stuff, import it, and everything works fine. So the authors gave the example, and one of them was shipbuilding in South Korea. You know, it turned out that South Korea had a comparative advantage in shipbuilding. So it had to be tried, and so government encouraged that. But it had to be adapted to South Korean conditions. So for example, South Korea's overall infrastructure had, docks that were really too small, that the amount of space available in existing ports in general was small. So they had to figure out, if I recall correctly, how to build ships in two halves that then they would put together. I think that this is one of the points that was brought out by Alice Amsden in her Asia's Next Giant book about South Korea's emergence. And the other is that imitation can be rapid, and this is the point I already raised, that we have the spread of cut flowers exporting in Colombia. Once a couple of exporters figured out that they could do this, a couple of entrepreneurs who took this business route figured it out, then it did spread quite widely. So that it can be a constraint on the economy to have too few productive ideas about what the economy can best specialize in at a point in time. So for some countries, in some cases, this could be an important constraint. And so it'll be one of the constraints that we look at when we turn attention to growth diagnostics. Thanks.